keep us moderated on the sound. Where'd Steve go? Steve is back there moderating sound. Good evening to everybody here in person. Would like to welcome anybody that's watching this public meeting live, or if you are watching it on tape delay. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know we've all met each other. My name's Doug. Against your better judgment, you elected me as the chairperson, which I just consider that as being your spokesperson. So my job is to help us. Since we're in football season, we're going to try to, as Hank Stram would say, we'll try to matriculate the ball down the field. GK is the vice chair of the group. So I want to thank you all for your time at our last meeting. I will remind you that this is a public meeting. I inferred it earlier, but we are recording, and all of these things are available to the public to watch either live or later. So we have a busy agenda, and I'm going to queue up our agenda here in just a minute. But I wanted to share some opening thoughts. Most of you have been on, whether it's an official public body, whether you were elected or appointed like you are here, or a nonprofit organization, perhaps a corporate board of directors. And a lot of times when we have issues in front of us, and clearly we have a lot in front of us as a GO Bond committee, many of us think about, and I do, how do I think about this? How do I go about approaching my thoughts? How do I go about making a decision? I wanted to kind of recap some of the things that have come before us. Not in this particular order, and this is not an exhaustive list, but we have been presented needs. We had the chance to tour public buildings, public bridges, public roads, public parks, public assets. We had the chance to kind of touch and feel and look at it and get a firsthand look of what the needs are. We have had, whether directly presented to us or at our discretion on city websites or paper copies, we've had a lot of past studies, and a lot of past studies have been referenced as part of this. These were past surveys of citizens, citizen satisfaction surveys, what citizens would like to see, different types of master plans and planning documents. I already mentioned citizen surveys. We have been asked to, in some aspects, think about growth opportunities. Where is the city growing in population, geographically? How does that impact where our needs are? In some of the things that we've been doing as a committee, we've been asked to think about it through the lens of economic development. What is the economic impact or return on a potential project? We've been asked to think about future city growth. If we're going to build things, what would be the needs, and what is that economic return, the economic benefit of taking action now versus in the future? And while this wasn't necessarily our call to action, has been impossible for us to ignore the question of what will our fellow citizens vote for? And I would imagine some of you probably would say, what will I vote for? That creeps into our psyche as we think about these particular issues. Of course, the issue of what can we afford has been a question that has loomed in front of us. And not just through the GO Bond, but as we've talked about public buildings, as we've talked about roads that would require maintenance, we have expanded our thinking to think about not just what the bond we could afford through debt service, but then what would be the long-term additional obligations to the city. Again, while this has sort of been maybe what I would call mission creeped outside of our mission, we have become a de facto programming review body, especially as it comes to looking at Justice Center and Recreation Community Center. We've been looking at things through the lens of what is programmatically viable. What do people want? What do people need? What does city staff need? What does city staff want? Again, what will people vote for? We've also been looking at a lot of timelines. There is impossible to ignore the timeline of when this vote would happen, what type of a decision we could make, the state law that intersects with us. So I just wanted to throw a few of these things out as a reminder These are the things that kind of make my brain hurt. Because when we think about, gosh, how do I think about these issues? These are the things that have now clouded us, and creep into our decision-making process. So I do want to remind you of the questions that we have been asked to evaluate. What is the total bond package? What are the categories in a potential bond package that we would recommend? And what are the amounts in those categories? And some of this exercise I'm doing for my own benefit to refocus us and recenter us on the questions that are in front of us, because we are at a point where we are trying to move towards some consensus about what we would recommend to the city council. And again, as a reminder, we are penciled in to present recommendations at a Tuesday, November the 12th city council study session. I want to offer my thanks for the ongoing work of city staff, the consultants and vendors that work with the city, elected officials who have given up their time to be at these meetings. So I can't remember who shared this with me, but somebody said perhaps a way to think about our steps moving forward tonight and subsequent work is maybe it's like a jury. And I've never actually been on a jury, but juries are called generally to have a unanimous verdict. And there is a high threshold in our society for getting to a unanimous verdict. So I would suggest to you, as after we hear a couple presentations tonight, that we can think about what are things that, even if it's one or two things, what are things that we unilaterally agree on, and we can sort of like charges in a criminal case. What are things that we could move over to, yes, we agree on these particular questions, then look at the things where maybe we don't agree and figure out how we might be able to move closer towards some unanimous consensus around that. And ultimately, there may be some things that we just can't agree on. Not that we disagree, but that we can't come to a point where we say, gosh, this is the timing and everything is right. We have the option to push things back to the council and to city staff for additional work, study, and deliberation. Perhaps that is us saying this issue isn't ready yet to go before the voters. So thank you for indulging just some opening comments. I'm hoping that helps to frame our thinking tonight. So let me talk real quickly through the agenda. A big piece of where I perceive, and I think most of you would agree, that we do not have a lot of clarity on right now is the proposed project of a recreation community center on the Independence Square, an infill development building approximately in the area of the police station and city hall as they currently sit. Information is important. The city has a contract with a developer to look at a downtown master redevelopment plan. So in a minute, Zach is going to talk about how that came to be through council action, and what the downtown redevelopment work has been that was charged to be done, and where it has gone to this point. We are going to hear from Bill, the aforementioned downtown master plan developer. And Bill is going to talk to us about, from his standpoint, where he sees the rec community center issue. And I am quite sure, and I don't say this with a negative tinge at all, I think that Bill is going to share why he thinks it's important, a critical piece in a larger piece of community development and redevelopment. So we're going to have that information shared with us, and then we're going to take some time tonight, sort of like a jury, I'm going to keep using this analogy, where we get a chance to go around the room, and I think that's a critical piece for us, is to give everybody a microphone to share what is on their mind about the overall bond package and particular projects, so that everybody's voice, I think I shared this at one of our early meetings, but I think it would be a miss if any of you walk out of here feeling like I didn't get a question answered, I didn't get to share something that I thought, or people in my sphere didn't get some clarification on questions. So we want to make sure that everybody has the microphone to share. So I've belabored my points enough. I think, do we have, if people need them, do we have refreshments? And we have bottled water. Wonderful. We have water. I need some. I'm going to turn it over to Zach. If I didn't officially do it, I did call the meeting to order. And I think, do we need to approve the minutes of the last meeting? Have those been, I don't know if we circulated those. They were attached to the agenda. Of course they were, because we have a great city clerk. At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the previous GO Bond Committee as presented.
So moved.
So moved. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We now have a second. Is there any discussion on the contents of the minutes?
I didn't see any minutes, so I'll not vote.
Me too. I don't see them. I haven't seen them.
Okay. I think we can hold that for a little bit. Could I ask very kindly, is it possible for us to print a few copies of that and we can push that later? We have a copier at our discretion here at the IUC. Great. We will hold, I don't know if I'm doing this. Yeah, we're going to, sure, we're going to hold this motion for later in the meeting.
If you go into the calendar invite, you can see them.
Yeah, I want to make sure people have it.
Oh.
I want to make sure people have a chance to review it. So we're going to table this motion. We do have a motion and a second. We're going to table it till later, and we will review those. So, Zach, anything else at housekeeping?
No other housekeeping items. I know I see staff over there getting the minutes sent to the right printer, so we'll get those printed off and circulated to the committee so you can circle back to that.
Great. I will turn it over to Zach, and just as a friendly reminder to all of you, if and when you have a comment to offer, if you will click your button until it turns green so we can all hear you and it goes onto the recording.
Okay, well, with that introduction, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. For those watching at home, my name is Zach Walker, and I'm the city manager for the City of Independence. I know you have a lot on your plate to discuss tonight, so I'm going to do my best to be brief, but also be informative to you. And as Doug mentioned, give our guest, Bill Crandall, the master developer, a opportunity to share with you from his perspective what he's working on as far as redevelopment of the Independence Square and how your work influences and shapes the larger redevelopment vision for the Independence Square as well. I'd like to begin tonight by just refreshing for the committee and for those watching at home where we left things at your last meeting on the 16th. Back on October 16th, we had a very healthy discussion in which we still considered the original proposal from over 12 months ago that city staff kicked around, this $250 million plan that begins to bite into the city's $1 billion of deferred maintenance. At that last meeting, we updated you on two significant changes, that being the Community Recreation Center as well as the Independence Justice Center. New figures, refreshing construction estimates, particularly in light of this post-pandemic economy we find ourselves in, and the new figures associated with those projects. We gave you a low-end and a high-end budget for those two projects, which ranged from $313 to $352 million. And my recommendation to you as city manager was that we endeavor to get this entire package below $300 million so as to leave a healthy amount of capacity in the city's debt margin in the event of some unforeseen disaster, as well as being thoughtful about the economics of our community and ensuring that the average taxpayer doesn't assume a burden that's beyond their capacity to contribute to the overall community agenda. After we had that discussion, the 15 members of the committee that were present that night, including Mr. Cowan, who allowed me to vote by proxy for him since he was out of town, which was very exciting. We had this result, the 15 members, there appeared to be a lot of strong support for the Justice Center, and then you can see the cascading effect from there. You know, we didn't get into a lot of discussion about the why behind this, but this was just more reflective of kind of that initial, where do people find themselves, what are some of the thought processes. As we mentioned at that meeting, this was not intended to be a final vote of any kind, but more of just a, let's get a sense and a pulse of where some of the members of the committee are at that night, as we have now had a couple discussions and some community tours of some of the issues in front of us. What I really want to talk to you about now, and this is more reflective of my perception of where the committee's conversation was at, is, as Mr. Cowan said, I sensed a great deal of, you know, even though maybe the vote distribution was kind of all over the place, just as a third party who had the benefit of watching your dialogue, I sensed a lot of support among the committee for many of these initiatives, but there seemed to be some pretty strong conversation around this idea of a recreation center. Now, some of you I know have either been elected officials or have worked in local government. I'm going to give this pre-qualification to you. It is not my job to try to sell you on what needs to be included in this bond. That is your job as a committee to decide what's in the best interest of our community for your fellow community members. It's ultimately the responsibility of your elected representatives on the council to decide what to put forward to the voters, and then the voters to decide what they're going to approve. But it is my responsibility to give you my professional recommendation and the logic behind that recommendation, so that when this conversation is over, I know I've done my job to give you all of the information at your disposal. So I want to talk to you just a little bit tonight, a little bit more on this idea of the recreation center and why that's been brought forward. It's not an idea that just, you know, hey, this would be fun to do. There's actually some strategic thought behind this, and that's where I kind of want to take our conversation. As a committee, you're in a process right now that really started back in 2016. 2016 is when I was appointed by the council as manager. Shortly after I was appointed, the council engaged in a citizen satisfaction survey. That survey pointed out some important factors, but one of the factors that really jumped out at me and my staff was 20% of the respondents were satisfied, meaning 80% were dissatisfied with the type and quality of development west of Noland Road. And I don't think you'll find that particularly surprising. But what was surprising to us is that represented a 12% decline since 2008. The open-ended comments in that survey really spoke to a community that saw additional investment in Eastern and Southern independence, but the continued degradation and disinvestment of Western independence. However, nearly 90% of the survey respondents said it is important to them to maintain the character of the Independence Square, and 93% said it's important to preserve the city's historic sites, of which obviously being the city's only historic district, the square is part of that. So that really landed with us as city staff. Got very low satisfaction with investment west of Noland Road, but very high priority of let's invest in our square, one of the preeminent commercial districts west of Noland Road. So in response to that, in September of 2017, the council, by resolution, formed a group called the Downtown Redevelopment Coordinating Committee. That was a 12-member citizen committee. We tasked them with looking at 16 different redevelopment plans for downtown. And now downtown was defined as the square, Maywood, Fairmont, what am I missing here? Inglewood, yes, thank you. That was kind of broadly defined as downtown. That group met for over a year, as you can see in this timeline. And it wasn't until October of the next year that their final plan went before the council and was recommended. So they took, as I mentioned, 16 different redevelopment plans representing 400 projects, and they boiled that down into 9 different categories representing 34 projects. They said, these are the priorities of things that we think are going to turn the tide on that dissatisfaction of development west of Nolan Road. And the report was intended to satisfy these 5 outcomes: to spur economic development, to promote tourism, to remove blight, enhance the quality of life for the people that live west of Nolan Road, and to attract private investment. Some of the key conclusions taken directly from that report: they wanted it to be clear that this is a citizen-driven initiative. This was a group of 12 citizens from all across the city who are looking at these plans that have either partially or incompletely been funded and implemented. They said a square redevelopment initiative is the next logical step in the overall journey for the redevelopment of Independence. And if you go back and look at that report, it really talks about you can go anywhere and find Target, Walmart, all these different commercial strip centers, but to find a downtown square that has Civil War history, Western migration history, presidential history, that is not something you can really find in the metro except in Independence, Missouri. So investing in that area was Independence's best hope for serving as a catalyst for our overall redevelopment. The plan also said that it could take a decade or longer. You know, this is not something, we didn't get into this fix overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. But if we stick to this plan, concerted focus, and if we utilize grants, if we utilize incentive districts, if we utilize the city's existing revenues, and if we go get new revenue streams, we can put together a solid plan that's going to move this community forward. And I'm here to tell you tonight things like grants. Our community has gotten really good. I should say our staff have gotten really good at competing for and winning grant programs out there. I learned just today that our staff has secured $14 million for sidewalk projects along 23rd Street, from the western city limits to just a few blocks to the east of the building we're sitting in tonight. We've got tens of millions of dollars to fund 24 highway improvements. I mean, those are just a couple examples of things where we are winning and excelling in the grant game. We formed new incentive districts: the Fairmont Community Improvement District, the Inglewood Community Improvement District. We have been blessed through voter approval to have things like the park improvement sales tax, the street improvement sales tax, the stormwater improvement tax. The new revenue streams is the piece that we don't yet have. So my point in that is we have been aggressive in pursuing every other dollar we can get, but nobody's going to do this last part for us. If we want to fully implement this plan and be the city I think we all want to be, we're going to have the courage to say yes to implementing these new revenue streams. One of the key parts of that plan focused on a square civic center. And now that report talked about 2 different areas, a north and south civic center, that said we need a mixed-use facility, a parking garage, an outdoor civic plaza in partnership with a developer, so that we can maximize both public and private dollars on our square. And a part of that square civic center was intended to be a community center with major recreational facilities. So that part about a partnership with a developer became the next logical breadcrumb that we needed to chase. I wished I could say that we jumped right into that, but we had this little thing called the global pandemic and guiding ourselves through that. And finally, we kind of all come through that, and we kind of pick back up with this conversation, okay? That led to us issuing a request for proposal to find a master developer for the Independence Square. City issued a formal request for proposals. A firm called Kopech and Brooks, who you're going to hear from in just a minute, was the firm that was recommended for approval and got that approval last August by the council. They have spent most of 2024 doing visioning exercises, community engagement exercises, stakeholder conversations to determine what does development of the square look like in a way that benefits this community, but is sort of supported by the people that live in this community. They are presenting their plan on November 12th at the same time that your recommendation is going. And that is where we start to see this marriage of the Geo bond conversation and the square redevelopment plan conversation. So with that, I am going to ask Bill Crandall to come forward. I wish I had a cool name like master developer, by the way. That sounds way better than city manager. But Bill's going to come and talk to you about the work that he and his team have been doing and why this conversation around a recreation center is central to our idea for redevelopment of the square.
Okay, thank you. Zach, thanks very much for the introduction. And it is kind of a crazy title, master developer. I don't feel like I'm a master of development, but certainly have some gray hair earned through the development process. So thanks for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to speak before the committee and recognize the council members and the mayor that are in the audience as well. So I think what we've got on the screen right now is the master plan, as you can see it, and we've delivered hard copies as well. So I don't know if those made it around the room or not. But let me just begin maybe a little more globally. In my experience, I've been working as a real estate guy since probably 1990. And a lot of my career has been representing third parties, and a lot of those third parties are municipalities that are that want to take their assets and do something different with them to create tax base, to create reinvestment. And it's a very difficult thing to do. It does take time, but I want to build on what Zach was saying, that the fact that the elected officials, and really born out of a community desire, have driven this thing to take charge of their own purpose and strategy is super important, because if you can't you can't will development to happen completely. It has to happen by virtue of market forces. But I tell my municipal clients for the last 30 years, you need to get into the real estate business, just the same way that when we were in Kansas City, Kansas, working on Village West, that they literally bought the land. They created the Star Bond legislation. They manufactured that themselves, and it was through a lot of hard work. So I think that what I'm hearing and what I've lived with for the last year or so with Zach and his team and the elected officials is that you want to change the trajectory of your community. You want to be somewhere else that you're not there right now, and you have really great bones to do that. I mean, if you just think about the fabric of downtown Independence, and Zach mentioned it, but the history of the Truman's history, the Santa Calagan days, the Overland Trails, and just this confluence of richness that happens down there, and the architecture and the planning that comes along with that, you have an extraordinary opportunity. And I think that's our goal. Our goal really is to change the health of the community, to have stronger community health. And in my discussions with several of my municipal clients, the community health can really be measured on 3 dimensions: education, public safety, and quality of life. And your GEO bond issuance, or your GEO bond consideration, really deals with 2 of those. It deals with public safety and quality of life, because the community center has been in many of the communities that I'll speak to, has been a catalyst for redevelopment, private investment, redevelopment. So I applaud you for hitting 2 of those 3 items just kind of out of the box with this GEO bond. And so Zach actually came and visited us with probably a couple years ago when we responded to the RFP, but the question is, why do you really need a master developer? And I think it's born out of the items, again, he mentioned a lot of this, but you want to stem disinvestment. Nobody has really been investing in a meaningful way in downtown Independence for decades. And what you really want to do is encourage reinvestment and encourage new investment. And you want to build on the rich history that you have with the, as I mentioned, with the fabric of the downtown area right now. But it really takes deliberate leadership. And it's evident to me that the city and the elected officials and the community have really challenged the government to provide that kind of leadership. But you need a strategy, and that's kind of where we came in. And when we pitched our ideas, and again, I've done this with different municipalities, but in order to have, and just to say it very bluntly, I have no interest in doing a study that sits on a shelf. I want to build stuff, okay? And it just gives me no pleasure to do a study and not see it built. So everything that I'm doing is with a sense of urgency. Everything that I'm doing should result in actual physical construction of buildings and reinvestment in the community. But you need three things. You need a master physical plan, which is what we've got on the screen right now. It's a little bit hard to see. Yeah, you might go back to that last slide. So a master plan. So this is sort of the three legs of the stool. You need a physical plan, something that you can literally follow and build on. It won't end up exactly like we've got it shown, but they're sort of guiding principles. You need a master business plan, like, why are you doing this? Obviously you're doing this to cause reinvestment. You're doing this to change the trajectory of your community. You're doing this to take advantage of the great assets that you have in the downtown area, the fabric that you can build on. You're doing it because you want to give your residents a better quality of life. You're doing it to help the retail businesses that live on the square right now that could be doing better. So there's lots of reasons, lots of business purposes to be doing this, but ultimately it's to create a better quality of life, to create additional tax base, to reinvest in the community, to have people return to independence. And then there's the master economic plan. Like, okay, so how are you going to do it? Well, what I said earlier is the municipalities need to get in the real estate business. You need to, control land, and by that I mean you need to buy land so that you can put it back to the development community, take it out of the. A lot of times land is a very complicated thing, and developers want to go make money as quickly as they can. So if somebody can take all that pre-development work and get that taken care of before the land is put out for development, that actually helps their schedule. But that also includes incentives and other grants and other things that we can do to help the development community. So you need a physical plan. Maybe go to that slide, Zach. Thank you. You need a physical plan, you need a business plan, and you need an economic plan. Those are the three legs of the stool that I think we've developed in our report. And when we have those all sort of squarely setting on the ground, we then have the opportunity to really go out to the development community and solicit interest and get people to come in and invest in your community. So those are the three things that I think you need. I talked a little bit about leadership. And I want to just reemphasize that nothing like this happens unless you have support from your elected officials in the community and staff. And you have that. And that's not always the case. So I think you should be very respectful of the fact that you've got that kind of leadership and that kind of cohesive leadership. You need to, one of the sort of essences of one of the things I'm saying is here, the city has got to cause this investment. They got to be the investor. And you're doing that with your public safety facility and with this community center. So you are putting your, you're jumping in there first with your investment. And whatever the bond issuance is will be a signal to the external private development community that Independence is really trying to make a difference with their community. So I think the fact that you're even entertaining having a master developer come in to try to develop a plan, having a bond issuance is just evidence to the external community that you guys want to change your trajectory. It's this. You're not the first. I mean, this has happened all through the community. So there are, if you just like the couple, 2 or 3 cities that we've been involved with, Merriam, they built the community center there. It's probably longer than 4 or 5 years ago. It's probably 6 or 7 years ago. My time flies, but I talked with Chris Engel, who's the city manager there this week, and I asked him, so Chris, what happened? He said, anecdotally, I can tell you that we probably wouldn't have got the $140 million, 300-unit development that's on Shawnee Mission Parkway in Antioch right before you get to 435 over in Merriam. It's the old Kmart site that they've redeveloped. It's under construction right now, and it includes a Class A multifamily development and all kinds of new retail there. So they've created a new investment there, which increases their tax base. All the property values, he said, around the Merriam Community Center have increased. So there's a real tangible, literal impact by having a community center in your community. Overland Park, if you know downtown Overland Park 20 years ago, it was just a quiet little sleepy, dying retail, nothing, no multifamily development, and now look at it. And their community center, I'm not sure that came first, but 25 years ago, the city of Overland Park had the Metcalf 2020 plan, which is kind of crazy because it's 4 years ago that it was supposed to have been done. But they envisioned a different community, and that's what we're doing. And if there's probably 1,000 new units, and that's probably $200 million of investment in downtown Overland Park. It's extraordinary. And all those little sleepy storefront retails, a lot of like what you have in Independence, they're all now, kind of local mom and pop, organically grown startup businesses. Really cool. And just so you know, I get excited about that. There's nothing in me that doesn't believe this can happen in Independence. I mean, if you just go look, you're not the first to do this. You're not on the bleeding edge. There's lots of people that have done this before you. Lee Summit is a good example too. I know people don't like to be compared, but Lee Summit took the reins and changed the identity of their downtown. They just literally willed it to happen. Lenexa, they really just, the Lenexa City Center area, we were involved 20 years ago with that. We were the master developer, and they built that whole community out of whole cloth. And they built a new community center. And I was talking with Todd Pelham, who's the deputy city manager there. He said, I asked him how important that was. He said, it's so important. Kiewit, which is an international engineering firm, now probably has 2,000 people in the city center area. He said, it was not certain that we will be able to keep them if we didn't build this community center. And they said when they toured it, they said that was one of their deciding factors, that they wanted to be in the city center because they had this great amenity of the community center. So it drove continued investment, and I don't know, there's probably 1,000 or 1,500 units in that area too. So that's another $200 million in investment, let alone all the retail and restaurants that occur. So I'm very unabashed about saying that community centers are super important to recatalyzing and reinvesting and being a catalyst for redevelopment in your communities.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes, ma'am.
May I ask a question, please?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
was just looking at this. I believe this original presentation was given to, or something similar with this map was given in April of 2020 of this year.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
And over where the Sherman Center now sits, that originally was, I believe, zero lot line housing and then the multi-housing down below. And now the community center has shifted over. I realize that the presentations, the presenter had said it was a fluid plan and
Sure.
things were going to move. But can you explain to me, please, what D, the mixed use, would be, please?
I could, but I don't have the map memorized. So sorry if I may borrow a copy. Okay, is that the old city hall sign out there? Yeah. So he's pointing. Sure. Sorry, I don't have my reading glasses and I couldn't see it. So. No, that's quite all right. So that's actually a great question because D is if I understand this correctly, that is the site that is the current site of the old city hall site. Yeah. And police, yeah, what's both, yeah. So the building to the left of that and the building to the right, yeah. So, well, it's a great question because it really is one of the reasons why we think the community center and other municipal assets should go into that in that area. So D, if it's mixed use, that would be multifamily and perhaps retail below, if that's what that item D is. To the left of that is the city hall site. And, so City Hall has moved. The police department will move. And so those buildings will become fallow. And it's a challenging site, just like from the elevation of where the courthouse is down to Nolan Road's about a 70-foot drop. So it's a really radical topographical drop. But the reason why we thought that those were good candidate sites for community center and other private investment is because if we don't do something back there, and when I say we, I mean the city, and we don't take charge of that, that's just going to be viewed as continued disinvestment into this whole, redevelopment area. And we just thought it created a perfect opportunity to Our big idea is to basically elevate that whole site by having structured parking below and having the community center, some green space above, a museum perhaps, have adjacent multifamily development, mixed-use commercial, private development, to really energize the east end of this whole district and act as an anchor. And so, yeah, it is fluid and it will continue to be fluid. But I think the stake we're putting in the ground is that's where we really believe the city ought to put the rec center, because that's going to be a reason to have tourism. Seniors come down there, families come down there. It'll create a lot of positive energy as opposed to going to City Hall or the police station. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but yep, okay, thank you. So, just sort of closing up here, a couple things I want to say. When I think about this opportunity, I think about what is it, what's common between the City of Independence, between any of the other municipalities that I mentioned. And I've said this before, but I think the goal is for the leaders in the community to deal with their underutilized assets and try to put those into production, try to cause them to induce private investment, because that's really where the bang for the buck is going to be. The city, in each one of those communities, the city itself led and had the desire to make a change. You wanted to change your own trajectory. The city knew that it had to reinvest in the quality of life assets, so it literally did that. Each one of those projects were funded. The Merriam Community Center, Lenexa Community Center, what's happened in Overland Park, what's happened in Roland Park and Mission are all publicly funded projects. So again, you're not charting new territory here, but they all had a catalytic and sort of a multiplier effect for private investment. There's no question in my mind that a new community center will increase tourism, it will increase traffic, it will induce private investment, and it will increase the quality of life. So I think Independence has a very unique opportunity because you have such great bones. I mean, that square is so cool. The history is so cool. People want that kind of quality urban life. People will flock to that. So I think uniquely you have an opportunity to build on something that has an excellent foundation, but you just need to take a hold of it and drag it down the track. Private investment is going to be a big thing. These are really, at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is create an economic engine, something that will make people think differently about the City of Independence. They'll make it, they'll drive from Johnson County, they'll drive from Western Jackson County, they'll come from Eastern Jackson County, they'll come from the north and the south, because the destination of what's there with the different restaurants, the different brew pubs, the different speakeasies, the rec center during the day, the seniors will come down there because they can go have coffee and exercise. So it really is this community center, and I don't want to understate this. To me, it's like the heart of the master plan. It's vital that you do this down there. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Bill, I'll kick us off, and I'm going to try to encapsulate questions that were holdovers from last week. I think probably many people around this room, if we were horse trading and we had to buy or sell, I'm buying what you're selling. Absolutely. The vision is great. I think the question where most of us are probing is what is best for the city? What will get us the best? I don't think anybody, at least in the conversations we've had, is defiantly opposed to a rec community center. From your perspective, I think where we are at in studying this particular facility is how is this building, how is it, and I don't want to get into the weeds and we the exact levels of programming, but what community center is a nebulous term. What makes this the catalyst for downtown redevelopment? Because we go back and forth, we look at swimming pools and basketball courts and youth tournaments. There's lingering questions about theater functions, open air amphitheater space. You talked about, museum, I'm not asking you to build a full business model plan for us, but from these other, where these centers have served as catalysts in the past, and you've seen them successful, what has been their identity that has made them an economic engine?
Well, lots of different things. I mean, one is the fact that it's kind of the answer. I think is sort of pedestrian. It's not some big glorious like aha moment. I mean, it's a place where you can go exercise. It's a place where you can commute, have community engagement with your peers, whether you're seniors or moms or families or your guys on a basketball. There could be a Wednesday night basketball league. It's a public investment in a state-of-the-art facility, and our society now is way more conscious of physical health than it used to be. So I think offering this as a quality of life amenity for your community is really the fundamental key. If go back to what Todd Pelham said, not me, but a city manager said, quality of life is important, and if you want to attract and retain the best residents that you can, having these kinds of amenities is key. And then, so that's just for the people that are living here. But then you just look at the kind of the multiplier effect, which I mentioned earlier. So whether I think the community center should go downtown. I'm a big believer in that. So no big surprise there. But if it were to go anywhere, I think you might enjoy the same benefits. Just like you would have people, for example, what happened in Lenexa. They built that whole city out of whole cloth. And Kiewit, a major international engineering firm, said, but for the fact that you have that there, we probably wouldn't stay in that location. And that's not me. I'm not saying that's the city, deputy city manager. So I think I think the community center has a unique draw that draws people of all ages, all times of the week. It has multiple function. You can have tournaments there, smaller tournaments. You can have youth, tournaments there. The programming for community centers can vary fairly broadly. So some of them might be more, rec center oriented, and some of them might be more library oriented. So I think the programming we need to work on, but I just think it's the organic demand for that kind of sense of community, and it creates traffic.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
So piggybacking on Doug's question. So suppose this community center is built on the square. Tell me then, as a developer, what would we see during, say, 10 years from now when you say development? What kind of development are you talking about occurring around the square area?
Great, good question too. So I think you could see lots of different kinds of development, but I would probably put those into 2 or 3 categories. One, I'd like to see multifamily mixed-use development. There's a site that's to the south and west of the courthouse, a couple blocks south. It's a big parking lot, city-owned, county-owned parking lots. That's a perfect site for redevelopment. So I could see, I think our capacity on that site is 300 units, which is a pretty big chunk, so you might do it in phases. So I could definitely see a mixed-use development there. The site where we would have where the police station and the police facility are right now, once those are removed, I could see, again, we would want to build that up where you'd have parking below, and you'd have less of a drop coming from the center of town. I could see the community center there, but I could also, that's a big site, so I could also see mixed use on that side, perhaps facing Truman Road, maybe vertical development, more dense. These would be more urban type developments. We've envisioned hotel just to the west of the theater, and what was a very neat outcome of our study. There's a network. There's a network of alleys in around this district. So we go from Truman Road to Walnut, from Pleasant to Nolan Road, but there's a network of alleys, and there are communities. Where was the community that you were in? Boise, Idaho. Okay, So there's in Boise, Idaho, and there's other examples of this where we would take that network of alleys and we would make that art galleries, art corridors. And that would be a tourism purpose. And what happens is people have art, but then they also flock to those alleys and they have, little bistro diners out there. Like, for example, the Jones store. This is our vision. Okay, we haven't talked to Ken about this, but it's a Jones, like all the buildings around the perimeter and I think a block outside the perimeter of the courthouse are all in the historic register, so you got to be careful with what you can do. But I could see keeping the structure of the old Jones store, but opening it up and creating kind of a food court gallery that goes from the courthouse to the west to that open parking lot just on the east side of the post office parking lot, and having that as a Vest Pocket Park or perhaps even more multi-use development. I just think it's really rich with opportunity, and not to mention refacing and repopulating all the storefronts. I mean, I think that's, just go to downtown Lee Summit, go to downtown Overland Park, see what they've done. And I think those are all real possibilities. It's a long list. I mean, it's really, you got a very fertile, rich opportunity here. Yes, sir. So no other questions. Thanks very much. It was a pleasure to present to you. And as you can see, we're passionate about it.
Another question.
Yes, sir.
Monday night, there was a presentation to the city council, and it looked to me like they were talking about a community center on the police building site. Am I correct?
Is that right, Corey? Was it police building?
Okay.
As opposed to City
that's-
Hall?
Yeah, and that was a very, I think, a very costly project because of the site and building structure, parking, and things like that, as well as the pool. On your master plan, you have a community center, T, at a different location, which then has a plaza and things like that. The cost would probably be, I would guess, quite a bit less. Given that we have to have these priced where we can get them passed in an election, do you have any thoughts about those two different locations and maybe even the composition of the community centers that would go in either site?
First, I think the key would tell you the community center is bubble T, which is sort of that fuchsia. So that's.
Yeah, let me jump in and just point to the plan a little bit here. So, yeah, right. And what we talked about before, it is on the current city hall site now, where the Justice Center is over here on this side. So, yeah. Yep. Coming from, Maple coming along right there to City Hall. So the parking lot for City Hall, and then it sits right in here right now. So right here is where the community center is lying on this plan, which is different from before, but again, it's fluid plan looking in there, and it really is built into the grade where the swimming pool can be on the lower level there, and it really fits in a lot better with how it would be aligned. So that's what they were presenting at on Monday's meeting.
Mr. Chair, that's part of the problem, because like Mr. Blick said, we were shown something totally different at Monday night's meeting. And in fact, and I've forgotten the gentleman's name that did the presentation for the community center, but he said, it is not a tourism-based facility. Well, not to criticize you, but you're telling us that it is a tourism-based facility. So it's moved, which is fine, nothing set in stone, but we've got to have a foundation to decide how we're going to promote this to the city council.
You're absolutely right, Ms. Young, and I'm here to tell you our recommendation is based on two things. One, if if you all saw the presentation Monday night, I'm going to be very direct here. You heard that their plan, the consultant's plan, was based off of 300, give or take, responses that were put online, that were not a scientifically based survey, okay? Our proposal, and I'm going to show you here, spoiler alert, I'm going to show you an amended plan here in just a minute, but we are proposing as staff to get back to exactly what we've talked about here and what the master development team has worked on, which is a tourism-based asset, okay? And I know there's been a lot of talk about what age group would come in and who would it cater. I don't think we should get lost in, I don't care if they're 10, 12, 9, 8, whatever. Their mom and dad drive minivans. I've joked with you all before. I live this torture every weekend, okay? This is a real thing that happens, and we should design this facility. Yes, I think there should be amenities that Independence community members can enjoy throughout the week, but on the weekends, this should be something that is going to get those minivans onto the Independence Square, and that should be built in that fashion. So you saw a concept on Monday night, but our recommendation and what I would recommend this committee's recommendation be is a asset that is geared primarily toward tourism and attraction services to the Independence Square. So thank you for that question. That's very important. No, please don't apologize. These are important.
No, I'm going to apologize to Mr. Crandall because he doesn't know me, and I am the villain in town, so my deepest apologies.
We're going to get along well. So, but I think I think tourism, there could be capital T and a little t. And like, if you think about like what's happening out on 135th and Quivira out in Johnson County when they have 20 soccer fields and 5 90-unit hotels, that's capital T tourism. Okay, so I think, like I would see that this facility could be, like Zach said, I think it's probably more of a sub-regional, draw. But I'm sure I didn't say it this way, but what I envision is that the tourists that would come to this district for the restaurants and the whole vibe and the galleries and the alleys and that sort of thing would be people from, 30, 40 minutes away. So that'd be probably the lower T tourism, lowercase t tourism. But I think it's an asset it's just going to anchor this redevelopment, period. It's like, if of all the vital organs, this is the heart. Yes, ma'am.
I would offer to the committee that as we think about this, part of our call has been to review the projects presented to us and ultimately to thumbs up, thumbs down them. So I think that one of the things I said in my long diatribe at the beginning of the meeting was the different types of information that we have gotten. I think probably for the purposes of considering this specific project, knowing that, as Lucy said, not everything will be set in stone, but I think that the concept that we need to be thinking about as we thumbs up or thumbs down it is a community center that serves as an economic revitalization tool for the Independence Square. Zach, is that fair? That's probably the question we're answering.
That is our belief, and I don't want to cast dispersions on the consultant that presented Monday night.
Sure.
Bill brought Leon Younger and Pros Consulting on board to help do some thoughtful analysis. They did a lot of work, trying to research, and they responded to the feedback they were given. But at the end of the day, my role in helping you and you doing your duty to respond to the council is to really boil this down to its essence and say, what are we hearing? And what is going to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people over the longest haul? And that's why I don't think we can try to be all things to all people. And so we've got to focus on what can we do that greatest good with the resources we have. So if it's okay, Mr. Count, I may transition to my last slide and then give you guys the balance of the evening, if that's okay.
Well, I was wondering if I
Sorry.
could speak up. Okay, so you guys know I'm very passionate about this particular project, so I've done a deep dive in grabbing some numbers.
Danielle, if you'll move the microphone. Thank you.
So I've done a deeper dive into some numbers of communities that are similar size to us that have done projects similar to this. And I submitted this to Heather, our clerk, and one thing that I'd like to stress is this is one of the projects that actually has an ROI for RGO bond. I went on a field trip last week and visited Lawrence, Kansas, and then I also visited the Home Field Rec Center in Olathe. The numbers that they gave us, so the Home Field Rec Center has had 800,000 unique visitors to their recreational complex since April of this year. Lawrence, Kansas, with their youth tournaments, are seeing 4,000 to 6,000 unique visitors each weekend to that complex. The Recplex up in West Des Moines, which is a much bigger Recplex, they draw over 1 million visitors annually, and it's having a $12 million local impact. And I put some in this that you guys will be given. I included links so that you guys can see some of this. But also too, Frisco, Texas, South Bend, Indiana have also done similar projects. Every single one of them have seen increase in population, resident satisfaction, and their health and mental health has gone up. My second page that you guys will get will have a deeper dive into some of the statistics, but I did want to share this. This has the impact that doesn't just help us now, it's going to have future impact with this project. Wouldn't it be great? And I'm a mom, I'm in a Subaru though, I'm not in a minivan, driving my 3 kids. I would rather go to somewhere like the Independence Square that has a presidential library, or, you know, these things that I could take my kids to that will also be a different benefit other than like the mental health and physical benefit. So I really do believe in this project, and I do think that it will attract more families to our city.
Thanks, Danielle. Appreciate your thoughtfulness.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Blake?
So the home field project in KCK is very intriguing. They have 10 basketball courts that can be made into, I think, 16 volleyball courts. That is a facility, is privately owned, privately run. No city dollars in it.
They use star bonds.
Well, they got financing through Star Bonds, and we don't know exactly, you know, what that was, how much that was, or how that is being paid for. But it's a different kind of facility, and it brings in tons of people from very distant areas. It's the kind of facility that the community can use during the week, but they tie it up something like 40-some weeks out of the year on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But it would bring a lot of dollars into the community. It would take a while to see if you could interest some private venture, and maybe even the people that own Home Field, to do something like that on our square. And you would have to, there'd be a lot of negotiations, and maybe we could use some industrial revenue bonds, things like that, to help out. But that's might be a several-year process trying to work out, first of all, to interest somebody or see if you could get somebody here, and then to go through all of the negotiations to make that happen. And that's a lot different from what, 2 or 3 or 4 basketball courts. And they said that even the 10 courts, they run out of space. They have to also use other courts for some of their tournaments that they have.
So one thing I'd like to also just piggyback, they're 6.5 months ahead of payments returning that star bond. So, and you're right, they're booked out years. And then the Lawrence facility is run by the city of Lawrence. When I asked both gentlemen at both facilities, I was like, what would you want if you could go back and do it again? And they said two things. They both said the same thing twice. They said they would have made it bigger and they need more hotels. Those are the two things both of them said to me. So they have people staying at the home field all the way through Johnson County into downtown Kansas City, filling up hotel rooms for this facility.
GK.
Yeah, well, I think I want to echo what Doug said earlier. Is one, we're not here to debate what type of rec center or what it's going to be. So I think that's important just to point out. I think these are healthy conversations. But I also want to give my opinion, because I live on the west side of Independence, that we can't leave a hole in the middle of west side of Independence, right? We're talking about moving the police station somewhere else, and there's going to be a hole there. And so I think the debate on what's going to be in that hole can be for a different committee, potentially, but we can't just leave a hole there. And so that's something I think I would like you guys to consider as we're thinking of this decision of how to potentially use this bond money.
So I think at this point, I want to turn it over to Zach, who's going to, oh, Leibette, I'm so
Sorry,
sorry.
I just wanted to share, with that space, what does it look like to build? Are we limited to how big we can go with this, or will that look like at
So
the square?
Dan Pierce was able to fit the actual Lawrence facility, which is, when you walk in, it's massive. And it does fit into the location that is proposed. And they do have a graphic that shows it.
With the parking they have, it would fit in the square?
I don't know.
Because they have an extensive parking lot too.
Well, there's no shortage of opportunities for parking downtown, but just to kind of maybe meld a lot of these comments, the question was asked earlier about the budget for the community center, and the same thing should be said for the police department as well. And I can just tell you from my experience with other municipalities, particularly when they are funding this from a GEO bond or other public incentive or public resources, public general fund dollars, it's a push and pull. So if you tell me I have $80 million, we're going to put as much into that $80 million as we can, and we're going to try to look at the community surveys to figure out what are the primary uses and try to get as many of those into that $80 million as we can. If you tell me it's $120 million, and I know it's not that, but we could do more. So to be able to sit here today and to tell you, number one, exactly what the program is, we don't know the exact program, because there's a whole once we get authority to put this on the GEO bond and the GEO bond passes, there's a whole another level of community engagement and programming that's going to go on for us to really refine that program, like exactly how many basketball courts, how big is the pool, is it a competition pool, how many lanes for the track, is there a kids pool, are there slides? I mean, there's a whole nother level of programming that will go on, and that will be every one of those decisions will be tested against the price and what is the benefit of so if you say you can do all this for $80 million, but you're only getting 60% of the satisfaction, or you're achieving 95% of it, then terrific. That might be, now you've evolved the program and the budget at the same time. The exact same thing. We just did this with Lenexa Justice Center. The exact same thing. We did this like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, where we, the appetite was this big, but we only had this much money. So we had to, like we didn't do the shooting range, and we changed the training center to be, not a $450 square foot shell, but a $250 square foot shell. So there's just the whole development process, there is a push and pull, but you have to have the authority, and you have to say, okay, your limit is X dollars, and then we're going to fit as much of that program as we can into that budget. I wanted to answer your question.
Was that presented to the people for a vote?
Absolutely.
So how did they promote just a lump sum amount of money, but we really don't know for sure what this is going to be for? How did they do that?
Well, I wasn't involved in those public presentations, but I can tell you there was extensive public presentations on both, like in the Merriam Community Center. I know there was a great deal there. It's not like we didn't know at all what we were going to be doing. We knew about, I'm going to make up a number, 75 or 80% of what we were going to do. It was the marginal stuff on the ends. We knew we were gonna have a pool. We knew we were gonna have a track, like, we knew we needed lockers for the police department. We knew we needed new courts that could handle X number of, judges. We knew a lot, but we didn't know everything. So to say that the program was completely ambiguous going into the vote is wrong. But through the course of knowing what our financial limits, it's like anything you do. It's like buying your own house or running a business. At some point you go, yeah, I'd really like to have that Cadillac, but all I can afford is the Chevy. And so you get as many add-ons to the Chevy as you can, and you get happy about that. So that's what will happen with this process.
I think these are great questions, and I think probably all of us recognize that within these questions, the third question that we are tasked going back to the council with is what is the right number in the categories? And I think I'm gathering a sense that as we think about a project like this, is the number that has been talked about in the particular category is that would that yield the desired outcome, knowing that there are other competing priorities. So with that in mind, I think Zach wants to walk us through some proposed amendments to the overall budget. So this is in your packet, and I'll let Zach walk us through that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna share just a quick amendment with you. I'm also going to point out that between what I have to say and you is pizza. So I'm going to try to be brief here so that maybe you guys can take a quick little break and get some refreshments and process what you're hearing. But I do want to, as I advance to this next slide, I want to let you all know that we heard pretty clearly as staff some of the concerns that you heard or expressed in your meeting 2 weeks ago. We do a bi-monthly call with Bill and his team. And last Thursday was one of those calls, and we expressed to them, Bill and team, what would happen if we decided that we didn't want to do the community center at this time. And the Chiefs jerseys are red. Bill was red when we expressed to them. And here's the concern. If the police station is approved by the voters to be located to this site, and it's already in the works that many of the administrative functions of City Hall, back office functions are relocating to the GEHA space, that is going to leave about 13 acres of nothing on the Independence Square. And that is the challenge that the master development team is faced with, and that is the challenge as staff. So that's why we have spent 75 minutes on this conversation with you tonight. So recognizing the importance of that, we went back to the drawing board with an amended plan. This isn't to be set in stone. It's just to provide you as a committee with a discussion place to start your conversations about how potentially you could accommodate all of these ideas within a budget that would still be tolerable, knowing that's a subjective term, but tolerable to the community. So in your packet, you can see that, and for those watching at home, we are proposing $119 million for the Justice Center. I think the conversation that we've heard, this Justice Center is somewhere in the neighborhood of $120 to $125 million, including a considerable amount of what's known as soft costs, so planning for further escalations in the market. When my kids go to Santa Calagon, we give them some cash and say, I don't really care what you spend it on, but when it's gone, it's gone. That would kind of be our approach with the Justice Center. We're proposing $85 million for the rec center. Again, I don't think we see this as what was necessarily thrown Monday night, but more, let's build a facility that has some community amenities, but is primarily targeted at bringing in additional youth sports tourism to our community. We've proposed taking the streets budget to $30 million, maintaining the bridges and culverts budget at 15, curbs and sidewalks to 10, historic sites to 7, parks to 5, and the committee can discuss that, but I'll tell you, I think we sense that there's a lot of support for further development of the Independence Athletics facility as a recreational and tourism asset. So While the committee could, certainly make that decision, that's kind of was our thought with the $5 million. $4 million for the animal shelter. The city facility says 0. You'll remember we had $3 million programmed in for miscellaneous city facility improvements. We would recommend at this time forgoing that. That would give you a budget of $75 million. Your packet would show then how those costs allocation percentages have changed. Obviously, the Justice Center with the escalation in labor and materials is the most substantial increase there. But again, you're building not building a residential or even an office facility, you're building a public safety building. So that's the justification there. A lot of the other spending categories were reduced, but you can see they weren't necessarily severely reduced. I would say the one that was the most aggressively reduced was the street improvements. But again, this is a community with a 0.5-cent sales tax for streets. I don't want to discount the importance of the street maintenance overlay, but that's not like this is the only funding source we've got for that, whereas many of these, it is dependent on this bond to address these. So just as a reminder, I don't want to make light of this necessarily, but the cost per home, per property owner, from $250 up to $275. Again, I don't want to make light of that, but you're really talking to the median taxpayer about $30 a year more to add $25 million to this project. So, Mr. Cowan, I'm going to yield it to you for further discussion, or if you want to take a break to get some refreshments, but that would conclude staff's presentation this evening.
Thanks. I think this is a good time for us to adjourn. I would ask that you remind me that at some point before the end of the meeting, we still need to approve the minutes, which, by the way, on your break, if you want to review those, they have been passed around. So we will consider this meeting, is adjourned the right word? In recess. Thank you. We will consider this meeting in recess until at least 7 o'clock, which is 10 minutes from now.
Heather, where's the pizza at? The people want to know. Okay, in the lobby.
Doug, hey Doug, I got you an answer too on Jackson County.
All right, I think we can adjourn from or adjourn back. I don't know what the right word is. We can come back from our recess.
We don't want to be here forever, so Doug is trying to get us to the finish line.
Well, we were really paging Mark Simkoski back to his chair. Thanks to city staff for providing those refreshments. Want to pick up the conversation here on the budget and talk a little bit about how this got in front of you tonight, and then I would like to move through some group discussion around this. As GK and I were talking about, gosh, how do we think about moving this committee closer to some level of consensus and decisions? It became very clear that from one of the stark differences from where we're at now to the beginning meeting was we had a math problem. We were looking at numbers that were much lower, that thankfully for all people involved, we got clarity on, especially around the cost estimates of the Justice Center. The Recreation Center, while it did come in slightly higher than was originally put in, it still was higher. So if you looked at all of the proposals in their newly adjudicated numbers, we ended up well north of $300 million, which was really beyond our guardrails. So GK and I met with Zach and said, as a place to start a conversation with the whole group, a chance for everybody to weigh in, what would a budget look like that still allowed every project to move forward in some shape? Some of the different city staff weighed in on what would be taking in our feedback versus taking in our feedback and what were some potentially items. The phrase we used was, where could a haircut happen if a haircut needed to happen? So that is how this budget got in front of you tonight. And so what I would like to do in an effort to move forward a group conversation and getting everybody a chance to weigh in on their thoughts, I want to pose a direct question. And I'd like to go around the room and answer the question. And the direct question is, do you support this budget? And if yes, why? And if not, what would you be willing to support? So I think we'll start with Mr. McLaughlin.
So just at a quick glance, looking at this here for the first time, I guess, just sharing our thoughts, our initial thoughts. I think I am happy to see that many projects are still on here. You know, I feel put on the spot now. Here's the first one, but
You absolutely were.
yeah. You know, a big key point to me as a father of young kids was parks, and so I was bummed to see that drop quite a bit. But I mean, my initial thought is I'm glad that so many of these are still on there, and yeah, I mean, my initial thoughts are I like this. I just am overall. I'm just concerned. We cut some more than others, and is there room to shift some of the funds from one of these to another area, just to try to help with some of those that got a larger cut?
I think those are great questions. Knowing that staff may not have that immediately available, perhaps as we're moving around the room, Zach, once you guys could maybe huddle together, and doesn't necessarily have to be up on the screen, but at least let us know when you might be able to answer the cuts that were made in the particular categories. I will tell you, I do know the one at least perceived sacred cow, if you will, that there was no haircut was the bridges and culverts. And that the reason on that was because we have 4 closed bridges, and it was deemed by staff recommendation that all 4 bridges needed to be reconstructed and reopened, and it would not be in the city's best interest to do anything less than all 4 and full reconstruction.
Can I also think it's important to point out during our meeting with city staff that the numbers they were going to use for the GeoBond wasn't the full fund for all of those programs. So like for the parks, for example, which I know you're very passionate about, there is a parks tax and there's other money coming in. So that money wasn't solely dedicated through the GeoBond. They were going to have other funds. So the city did make a cut at the bond, but not necessarily cut to the parks programming, for example.
Sorry, I was gonna ask, do we have a side by side as we're looking at this and deciphering what our thoughts are on all of it? Versus
The beginning of your packet has the original document. You can pull that sheet out.
Oh, thank you.
Jeff, I think you're up.
Yeah, sorry, Jeff.
I'm going to say as a whole, I am supportive of this. I think I'm trying to remind myself of, what we're really asked to be doing, and I keep going back to those initial questions and trying not to be the decider of will the city support this or not, but more look at it as, what are the needs of the city. We know that there's over a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance throughout the city. I believe it was a little over $1 billion. And so trying to tackle at least some of it does become important. You can't kick the can down the road forever. So I do believe that it's time for us to do that. And I also believe that we have a chance to maybe create some inspirational investments that, remind us that we're worthy. And I think because of that, I am supportive.
Kate?
Like Jeff, I think I can support this. I'm really glad to see the curbs and sidewalks and bridges and culverts in there because that was a big deal to me because I just kept thinking as we talked about all these really great things, and I live near the square, so I would love to have everything that this plan calls for. My life would be awesome. But I also think about people. I'm a social worker. I work with people who don't have cars. We're cutting our public transportation. We need sidewalks. We need to think about people who might not use the rec center or go to any of the cool little shops on the square. They still live in our community. So that's really what I was thinking about. And I think the historic sites are important and the parks and the animal shelters. So I feel a lot better about these numbers.
I haven't really had time to compare, but from what I'm seeing, I am a little sad that the animal shelter gets a cut because they don't receive funding or support from any other. Is that correct? Because when I look at streets, I'm on the Streets Improvement Oversight Committee. We're getting funding, some sort of funding that comes in that route. And that applies to some of the others like the historic sites. But also sad to see that the parks got a big cut. Because I don't know where we're going with the animal shelter with $4 million when we're trying to pay off a debt that's existing right now and also build a new facility. So, but I definitely support the Justice Center. I definitely think that increase was needed. So I guess I'm indecisive right now with that.
Thanks, Levi.
I'm really glad to see that the Justice Center is amended to close to the high end on that. Excuse me. There was a lot of during the presentation on Monday night talking about maybe not doing as much, and although some of the programs or some of the project possibly could be delayed, things like the training center with the police department are so very important because it serves not only the citizens, but it serves the police department. And the training is so very important to our police department. I would hate to see us not be able to do the two contiguous buildings together. Perhaps the K-9 unit doesn't have to move, but we need to really focus on making sure that the Justice Center is built for today and built for 50 years down the road, so some other poor souls don't have to come forward in 20 years and do this.
Doug, I appreciated your preamble earlier and keeping us on track. And part of, I think, what you said, and I'm reminded of, is what makes this passable in the eyes of the voters. And frankly, 275 is a big number, bigger than the original 250. I believe the pass, and I think it's been accomplished here, is we have to appeal to a wide range of voters. And in lieu of cutting any one or two sure line items completely, I mean, that would turn off some voters. And most people vote as to what's in it for me, you know. And so we preserve that, and that's good. Unfortunately, some things, you know, to get to a package again that I think is passable, we got to hear. I will tell you, originally when I came tonight, I was really on the fence about the community center, rec center, whatever we want to call it. You know, I'm a believer that it can be a real catalyst. The only thing I have on that is, again, appealing to a wide range of voters. A lot of what the rhetoric I heard tonight was, again, making it more sports oriented. And again, Independence, I don't know if anybody has real demographic numbers, but Independence is heavy on seniors. And if they feel like, gee, we're losing our pickleball potential on the weekends, we're losing cornhole, whatever, you know, card games, you know, educational classes. I didn't, and maybe that's down the weeds too much for the specific community center that was talked about a lot tonight, but we just make sure that if some of those types of features are preserved, then we appeal to that voter group as well. And we just need to keep that in mind, I think. I could be behind this. Other than maybe it's still 25 million too high, I think. But the concept I like. I had my own, not counting the community center, that was very much in line with those other numbers. So I just hope we get to something that we feel the voters will pass.
Thank you for your thoughtful comments. I would just add, I think whatever we recommend to the city council, I think there's an opportunity, as you well put, not to get too far into the weeds, but I wrote down robust programming. I think those types of reminders are more than appropriate as part of our, what will make a project successful. Again, not too heavy on the programming, but high level reminders. Larry?
In my opinion, everything on there you can make a case for individually. 275 million, 250 million, 200 million. These are huge numbers, and have to think about getting a bond issue passed. A lot of people in our community have very little money, and a couple $100 tax increase is a lot of money for them. And they may say, I'll pay for a few needs, but I cannot pay for a bunch at once. When we toured the police building, a case was made, a pretty good case can be made, and it seemed like we had a lot of information that the public received about 2 years ago on the condition of that building. And I think a case can be made for a Justice Center. What I worry about is if you have one big bond issue, you don't get a Justice Center because you don't get any of it. It takes a 57% vote. So a lot of thought has to be given to what will garner 57% of the votes. And we just had property value reevaluations. We had police sales tax increase. We might have a senior citizen sales tax increase. And now we would ask for a big property tax increase. So I've wondered if you should break this up into 2 or 3 different bond issues. One, the Justice Center, one, maybe the Recreation Center, and one, all the other things. The other thing is, could the tax increase be phased in over time? All of these things can't be built right away. They can't be built, it's going to take 5-6 years to get a lot of this stuff done. Could something be structured where people say, okay, we will get all of these things over, let's say, a 6-year period, but the bonds will be structured, they'll be issued in smaller amounts periodically, and the retirement of the principal will be structured in a way that we'll get about 1/6 of an increase of this total increase every year. So it's only $20, $30 a year instead of $200 and some dollars a year. So unless somebody can come up with something that people believe they can handle, I think it's too much for one package.
I appreciate that, and I'm quite sure that that exact question or a similar question has floated through all of our minds about what are people willing to pay for.
One last thing. When you start going out to talk to people about bond issues, they will have 1 million questions. Citizens are smart. They ask you questions you never would have thought of. Something like the Recreation Center is so amorphous at this point. It keeps changing. How do you answer the questions? Even the Justice Center, they have to know, they're going to say, why do you have to bring in the bomb squad and bring in the canine and some of these things all at this time? We've been living with them apart. Do we have to spend $120 million? You have to have an answer for it, one that they will buy. And they say, okay, that's so good, I will vote for it. Can all of this be ready in April? That's my question.
Yeah. Again, an astute question, and I would never dismiss the question of anybody on this committee. I will say I don't think we will ask for the committee to take a recommendation on how the ballot will be structured. It doesn't hit one of the 3 questions, but it is an important, I think, for us to consider as we think about it.
Doug, I think it's important to point out too that in some of the things that we were told through the city staff that there will be a gradual increase of the bond, so there will be like this wave option. So exactly what you were speaking of, that would be easier to digest is something that I think is actually going to happen if this bond were to pass. So just to put that information back out there to folks. Also, if you could, were you a yes or a no, sir? I'm just trying to gauge the room on how you feel about this, and so just so we can have an understanding.
I said, all of these things are either needed or are desirable. I would not strike anything from a list. My issue is I will not recommend $275 or $275 million bond issue out there without answering all these other questions. And if we don't have the questions, then I guess it would have to be delayed or broken up into pieces or something.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think all of us can immediately envision, and this is not our job to forecast the election or the run up to the election, but I think all of us can forecast a long list of frequently asked questions that would have to be assembled to start to tell the story. Kelly.
Thanks, Larry, and thanks for bringing that up, because I live in a community that's 55 plus, and a lot of people are on fixed incomes. So I do appreciate what you say, but I could live with something like this. I guess my concern is I listened to the planning session on Monday, and I just wonder what has to be cut out of the Police Justice Center plan to only fund it 119. I think they said 122.6 Monday. I just hate to kind of nip at something when we're that close to that amount. So that was my comment on that one. And I do wonder about, I'm glad to see the streets got cut, the street maintenance, because I guess in my opinion, I've always felt GO bond should be more for capital improvement, community improvement things. So, I mean, I still have some issue with the streets. I know a lot of streets need repair. I was good with the bridges and culverts. I'm a healthcare provider, and I see a lot of, health and safety are real important to me, and those are safety issues, getting ambulance places, that kind of thing. Curbs and sidewalks, I hate to see that get cut too, because, and I don't think we have Dale Earl here tonight, but I know that was a priority for him too. I grew up in Independence. I walked to school. A lot of the road, this was a long time ago, but a lot of the roads I walked did not have sidewalks, and a lot of those roads still do not have sidewalks. So that's kind of one that I'd really like to see back up a little bit more.
Kelly, if I may interject just real quick, I think it's worthy to note on the sidewalks, because I am a big sidewalk proponent. Lisa, I believe that you had made the remark that at the $10 million number, that would allow the Fort Osage schools in the city limits of Independence, along with several ISD schools, to have fully built out their sidewalk to schools within the requisite radius. Is that correct?
Yes, so specific.
Little microphone.
You can.
So there were actually a total of 7 elementary schools that were targeted by the 2 school districts, 5 from ISD and 2 from Fort Osage. And to do, we had initially proposed perhaps a quarter-mile radius around the elementary schools, and the superintendents actually requested more to focus on the arterials in a quarter mile in each direction on those major roads in front of those schools. So running those numbers, we were looking like we were going to come in at about $8 million to address the school's request. And of course, when we start doing sidewalks, there's other ADA compliance and stormwater issues that come up. So rounding up to 10 to address all of those. But the number got cut down to what would allow us to address the 7 specific requests from the school districts.
Sorry for interrupting you, Kelly, but I just wanted to add that
Thank
context.
you very much. Thanks for the clarification. And then also, I guess being a healthcare provider, I do feel a recreation center of some sort is important, but I also agree that it needs to appeal to all ages. And I know in one of the surveys that we looked at, a therapy type pool that's warm water is important. And that's a really hard thing for people that have arthritis and, you know, older people and young kids to learn to swim in. Those are, I think, a priority. I also feel that the walking track kept getting brought up too. And I think that's important too, because I don't think a lot of people maybe feel as safe going to the Independence Center as they used to and that type of thing for when it's cold outside. But I would just say making sure that those are priorities once again for that. I think that's, and I guess the only other thing when they were talking the other night about the community center, I did see over and over a lot about the theater thing. And that's another piece that I'd hate to get left out, because that seems like that's a really important thing for the community.
Thank you for your thoughtful comments.
I'm probably not going to be a fan of everyone here, but I'm still questioning the rec center as far as on this bond. I'm not opposed to it. It was great to see the plan tonight for downtown Independence and how it could be brought in there. But I feel like there's more than one conversation around a rec center or community center. Do we want to profit and make money, and is it going to be a big money maker, or is it going to be a community with a little bit of extra coming in? And I've heard both requests, honestly, from city people. So I think that decision kind of has to be made on what we want to do with it before you can say one way or the other where to put it. So I just feel like that's a standalone conversation or issue or vote or whatever. And if we do that separately, then I feel like we could go back to last week's conversation of maxing everything out. And would we come up with 258? We would be at 258 if we got the most out of everything else. So that's where I'm.
Can you clarify, am I hearing you correctly that in the math, if you pulled the rec center and then put everything back up to, you came up with 258?
Whatever we were figuring last week came
Okay.
to 258, and I think it was the low end. I don't think it was the high end. I think it was the low end, but without the rec center.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not opposed to the rec center. I think it's a great idea. We just have to figure out what concept, and that's such a huge conversation. And I do think it will inhibit the vote if it's added in there.
The who am I as the rec center, right?
Yeah.
Who am I? What is my purpose?
Right. So.
Thank you so much.
I'm basically going to echo what she said because I played around with numbers trying to figure out what the best thing to do. I'm not opposed to a rec center. I've lived in cities that have had rec centers, and it's wonderful. But I think for this vote, there's other things that are more important. And I think that, as she said, when I did the math, I took the $352 million, that was everything at the top dollar. I took out the rec center and I came in at 258. I think that gives everybody, the one thing that my peers have talked about, and I said, well, how do you feel about a rec center? We don't need a rec center. I need my streets fixed. You know, streets are a big issue in Independence, and you could have all the tourism in the world. If you've got crappy streets, you're not going to have the tourism coming in because they don't want to drive it. So the Justice Center is, for me, a go all the way, top dollar. I've taken the tour of both the police station, the different outlying buildings. I think they all need to be together. It only makes sense. And the rest of curbs and sidewalks got cut half. That to me that's a big deal. The animal shelter is another one that, it was only $1 million, but you know, that's going to be a big deal because people want the best for even strays. So that would be my feeling on that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, I have to say that I ditto to both of the, the last two ladies, but I also want to say the rec center for me is a scary thing because that is a huge amount of money that we could use nice sized portions to go for the historic sites, parks. I feel like the email that we got earlier today, and I apologize, I don't remember the gentleman, one of the citizens that sent that. The animal shelter is a big question mark for me. I love animals, don't get me wrong. I am highly concerned about the situation with the county and us. And I feel like that begs looking at. And I would hate to see us throw money at something that we shouldn't have to, or to maybe be able to come to a consensus with them as far as how we could partner on something. Did it? Oh, Zach, do you know something about?
Pardon me. So I did not have an opportunity to watch the county legislature meeting today, so I apologize that I maybe some of you have a better update than I do, but there were competing resolutions put on the agenda for the county legislature today. The resolutions that were publicly produced, none of those contained the city's request to allocate a portion of the $71 million that the county has. This would have been about $3.5 million to pay off the debt, so a fraction of the money that the county has available to them. We had a presentation to the council Monday night about the deficiencies at the shelter. We had really good conversation about that. That led to coverage from a local television news station yesterday, which I'm just going to be blunt, finally got the attention of the county, and they sent some facility maintenance staff out to the shelter today to respond to our kind of months-long inquiries about some fire suppression issues, these doors that slam close that could catch a tail of an animal in there. But, you know, these are kind of some of the fractions of the costs of the things that we need to get addressed. And it still leaves unresolved without any county appropriation or funding in this plan, this very awkward and frankly unworkable relationship between the county owning the building and the city owning the land underneath of it.
Zach, I can tell you that they tried to pass 2 resolutions today and it failed, and that they're going to go back for a vote on Monday. And it doesn't look very promising, but that's me speculating. So I wouldn't hold out for that ARPA money.
So the money we get, be it 4 or 5 million, probably 3.3 is going to purchase the building, and the rest would be maintaining.
So, yeah, I
If
would
they don't
say
fix.
so the county has about, on the current debt service installment plan that they still have about 10 years left to pay off that building, which means if we don't change something right now, we're going to continue to stay in this arrangement of county building, city land for the next 10 years. If we could get 3.3 million, whether it be through ARPA monies or this bond, we could solve that issue. That would leave the immediate, I would say the immediate triage issues that have been identified total about $600,000, but there's a lot of needs beyond that. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, I would say, to further develop and enhance that property into something that's more than just a shelter and something that's more robust for our community and for the pet population as well.
4 million is going to be break even, if that.
4 million is going to get you the building and take care of the crisis fix-it stuff.
Okay, so that being said, if we had money that was slated of the $85 million for the rec center that we could add to substantially for the animal shelter, that would be huge. If we're going to wind up being able to sever the relationship with the county and that be our baby. So I also have questions about the rec center. I mean, I love the idea. I think it's fantastic, the talk about generation of revenue. I worry about if we build it, they will come. And I feel like there have been poor choices made. This is a lot of money, and I hate to see yet another incarnation go bad. I think we have basically, this is Independence, we're working with the Mayberry budget, and I just don't see that kind of money. I'm not feeling that. So the other thing that I also have to say is we kind of came to the consensus, it looked like, with the dot vote. And so far, everyone that has spoken is for the Justice Center. I think it would be great if we could at least firm that up and take that off the table. But I think that's something I would love to see the opportunity. Chief Dustman is a wonderful speaker. It would be fantastic if you guys could do some type of an infomercial type thing where the general public gets to see what we got to see and understand why you need what you need, and then push that, saturate that video online so that everybody can see that, because I feel like if everybody could see what we saw, everybody hands down would be like, yes, that needs to happen. Okay. I think that'd be great. Thank you.
We've got extras in the room.
Thanks. Nick?
Yeah, I'm good with the 275 million. I would have liked the animal shelter to stay the same, and also the historic, just because it's very hard to raise money, especially like the Vale, to keep them up. I do like the idea of grouping them on the ballot maybe somehow, just because we wouldn't want the Justice Center to fail because of the rec center. Other than that, I'm good with the numbers.
Thank you. Shannon?
I agree with what the ladies have spoken about earlier. I think that we personally ought to take the rec center completely off this allocation, this bond. And let's say that it passes tomorrow and then the voters agree with it and they're going to agree with everything but the rec center. And then it takes the 3 years or so allocated to build all the new Justice Center right here. No one wants a blank space where the city hall and the police station are right now. Nobody. But once that is torn down, which will be after this new center opens up, then the residents will see that we're tearing down the police station. We have these big areas, and then we can revisit this in, let's say, 3 years after this new Justice Center has been built. Plus, again, I will reiterate what they said, that will allocate additional funds to bring back up the 275 number, or you could just drop it down to this new number, which leaves basically 190 without the rec center, round it up to 200 million so you have a little bit of play money. But it's this rec center that's really sticking my crawl. But the location of that ought to be revisited. I am all for a recreation center, just not where it's being planned or trying to be planned. That is not a good location for tournaments. We cannot handle that kind of traffic. And I went to the Sermon Center last week at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There were 12 people there. 2 of them worked there. It's not busy during the afternoon. So it's not this influx of seniors just looking for places to do. Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 are the slowest time for places like this. So we have to build something that would keep it busy during the day, that would get the influx of money and or the revenues coming in with memberships. But I know some people get upset with that, but I still think we ought to take this to City Hall without the recreation center. That will drop it down substantially, and we could stick to the number of 275, but you could give everyone else exactly what they wanted, or 258. I'm sorry, maybe off on the numbers, because I saw there's so many different changes of this 258, 275. So we're not going for platinum, we're not going for lead, or, we're going for gold instead of it. But that's my opinion.
Thank you so much. Richard?
Yeah. I hope you can understand me okay tonight. I have a tooth taken out of my mouth because of the fact that bridge has failed in my mouth. So I hope you can understand me okay. I'll try and stay close to the mic. I would like to see a little bit more spent on parks. I think they're very important, and I don't feel like the park that I live by is maintained very well, especially since you can't even see the creek. But overall, I think there's much in the bond package to like, and but I have met and heard from a substantial amount of taxpayers who have received 50% increases and much more in their property taxes. This needs to be resolved. Somehow the county needs to get this right. But why does this county need so much money, and why can't they help our city with the animal shelter? They have a responsibility. I have serious doubts that the bond package can pass. Nevertheless, I feel like let the people decide. Thank you.
Thanks. GK?
I'll let Danielle go.
This is going to be shocking to everyone. Just kidding. I actually like the proposed geo bond allocations. I think that it makes it has a little bit for everyone. You know, I strongly do disagree about the recreational center. I think for many, many years, our city has not been forward thinking. And like I've said, so many people that I know with families don't stay here. A justice center is really important, I agree, but that doesn't make people want to come to Independence. The bridges and culverts, a lot of people outside Independence aren't going to really know about some of those things. I've heard from several families after the decision to close Adventure Aces, what are we going to have for our kids? And so for those reasons, I'm in agreement with allocations.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to address that. I'm not against the recreational center, but I think, as some have said, that it's just poorly planned at this point, and it's poorly spaced. It has no room for growth. I envision building one out at the athletic complex that we saw in our tour. There were hundreds of acres out there, and it can be expanded through the years to include that sports tourism that we keep talking about. We've got the football fields and the soccer fields and the baseball fields. You got place for indoor and outdoor pool. There's so much more viability to me in that location than there is at the square. And yes,
And I don't disagree with that, but we have to care about the Independence Square.
agreed.
It's too important to our city. We are so blessed to have the history that we have in this town, and we cannot hurt it. We should only do
And
something
we could
that's gonna help
capitalize
it.
on that by building a museum down there on the historic square with a historic museum instead, in my opinion.
But I don't see a museum bringing in, 4,000 to 5,000 unique visitors a weekend. Well, the 85 million is pretty substantial. And I did want to note Taylor at the Lawrence Rec Center is willing to come to Independence to help start it and run it, which I think is very nice.
I think one of the things we have to look at as far as the square is concerned, excuse me, is preserving what Independence is. A museum, people that I talk to, because I work at the Royals team store and the Chiefs team store, so I see a lot of the out-of-town people that come through, and they say, what do we need to go see? Well, Truman Library, that's always one that, and that's what they're excited about, is the history part. They don't care if there's a hotel up there. They don't care about that. They want to know what to see. If we start building hotels and a rec center, that's not what out-of-town people care about. They care about the history of the Independence area because of what we're known for and being the Three Trails area. And so I think we have to, if we start going and putting hotels up and we look like Metcalf in Overland Park, you're not going to bring any tourism in because we're no different than anybody else. So I think we need to focus on revitalizing the square in a way that makes sense. A museum, Steamboat Arabia. You know, one of the gentlemen that founded the Steamboat Arabia Museum is from Independence. He's the guy from High Boys.
They tried to come to the square years ago. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I did
Bad
not know
blood
that.
there, but I don't know.
Well,
Not
it's
saying it
different.
can't-
Well, I'm just saying, I'm using that as an example.
Well,
The
it's
different
actually
regime.
part of the DRCC plan. In the DRCC final report, it has a plan to add the Steamboat Arabia using a TIF. And that's perhaps after the bad blood happened afterwards. So initially, the DRCC committee wanted the history.
Yeah, I think we need to hold true to independence because otherwise we're just Overland Park or Lenexa or, I mean, it's a different type of people. You know, Johnson County's Johnson County. We're not Johnson County. We're Jackson County. We're Independence. And I'm not saying we're, you know, Mayberry. But I think we have to look at what draws people here. And what draws people here is the history, not a rec center. The rec center should be for the people here. And then if you get the other people to come in, great. That's awesome. You know, but I just feel like I don't want to lose the historic value of the square.
Independence has a branding issue. I mean, even though our police did so amazing and got an award from the White House for cleaning up the meth situation, 20 years later, people still refer to us as a meth capital. When you bring in these types of things, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing to be compared to like a Lenexa or an Overland Park, because those are desirable places for shopping and restaurants and family recreational events. So I also think that the rec center would help with the city's branding.
Can I just say something real quick? I agree with the branding problem, but I think we can't compare ourselves to Lenexa. We cannot compare ourselves to Lawrence or South Bend, Indiana. Lawrence has KU. South Bend has, you know, a university. Johnson County, Kansas is full of people living in homes that, you know, are in the millions. And I used to work out there. I was a newspaper reporter and I covered government. So, you know, yes, you had people who don't want to pay taxes, but you have people that know that they have to pay taxes to have great roads. Their roads are great out there. Yeah, they have problems, but we do not have that kind of demographic here. And I wish that we did. And why don't we have that? Because they're moving, well, that's a whole other story that we don't want to get into that. But the point is, I love the idea of the recreation center. I love the square. I just invested a lot of money in my house that's 2 blocks off the square. I have no intention of moving. That's my neighborhood. But I also know that I don't know that our population can, I mean, they're just trying to make ends meet. You know, we're all probably able to vote for this thing, but I just think we have to really think about, you know, what can be supported. And my question is, are there other ways to do some of these things we want to do? Does it have to be in the GO bond? Can we be creative, you know, like some kind of public-private partnership thing for the rec center or something like that? That's all I'm saying is I totally agree with you. My children are now adults, but when I was in your shoes, I was going around to other places, having to go to rec centers. I love it, but you have to be realistic about the people that live here, you know, and what their, you know, Maslow's hierarchy, what are their base needs? They need streets and sidewalks and parks because they don't have money to go to the movies, but a park is free. I mean, we have to just think about those things, and that's all I want to say. Thank you.
And also, enticing people to grow the population will also spill into improving the city. So, anyway.
I think it's important to bring it back in just for a minute. I think what our task is to make a recommendation. And so you're looking at the votes, I'll tell you, we're basically split down the room. You know, and so I think on
Can
this.
I chime in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add an asterisk to what you said. I think that the good news is, from a consensus standpoint, it is the rec center that's kind of here. I think generally, yes, there were some slight differences in I wish animal was a little bit higher. I wish we could do a little more here. But I think the good news is, for where we're at, we are most of the way on most of the stuff.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going to get at, but I think
sorry.
part of our recommendation, no, you're totally fine, Doug, is I think we need to understand that we can't let the city leave a hole where the Justice Center is going to be. And so I think part of our recommendation can be, we're not ready to say yes on a rec center, but that there has to be something done there. And do we allocate some dollars of that something before we move this forward for the bond, whether that's a rec center or anything, just for development on the square? Or do we just let them figure that out later? I mean, so this is part of the problem, because we're just kicking this can down the street for us to be on another committee in a couple of years to figure out what we're doing with the hole in the middle of the downtown square.
Is it possible to not destroy the police station and City Hall and perhaps find businesses that, for example, City Hall, that would want to come in and at least take it over on an interim basis, to where you don't have to bulldoze it down and leave that hole?
We have some pretty big buildings. I mean, the Forest Medical Building it's a 155,000 square foot building off the square. How many years has it been empty? I mean, people don't want to come into these old looking, outdated buildings. I don't think that I don't think it's cost effective to try to fix the police station. I think that's why we're trying to start with a new one. And
I don't want to thwart any conversation, because this is a good conversation. I will, especially at this point of the evening and where we're at in our committee, I want to make sure that the conversation is moving us forward to resolution and not opening up additional conversations.
They have other slides too that we talked about.
If I think I heard thrown around, what does it look like if we fund this plan at the full amount without a rec center? That's a slide we have if you all just want to see that for communication purposes. Sure. Okay, let me try to work my magic here. Okay, that is what it would look like if the Justice Center was at its full capacity. All the other spending categories had allocations that match their original amount, including, miscellaneous city facilities. You got to keep in mind, there's, independent of police and all of its miscellaneous facilities, there's 72 total facilities that we manage, 10 of those being fire stations, which wouldn't be in that, but still that, other buildings, fix it kind of stuff. So that's what that project budget looks like, reflective of, no recreation center and no site development. So when I say site development, I mean, starting to run utilities, taking care of the grading work, things that would make, to Shannon's point, a recreation center possible in the future, but would not be funding the actual construction of the facility itself. This is to give the committee an alternative look.
I think I've asked this before, but is there opportunities for any additional grants, funding to come in before we start stripping more from what's already in front of us?
I think I certainly wouldn't want to talk over Zach, but I think there are endless opportunities, and I'm sure city will pursue those. But it'll be best analogy is like parallel trains on parallel tracks, or trains on parallel tracks. It's you're moving ahead, and at this point you may get a win and say we're getting $1 million from the state of Missouri to do this. We may get $1 million for this. But I would doubt that it would be something that's in hand prior to any decision to move forward.
And I guess my other question is that we're all pro Justice Center because mainly I would assume because of what we've seen. The public doesn't have that perception based on the survey that was shared in the last meeting. Do we know the demographics of the households where these surveys landed?
We do not, you mean- you're talking about the community center survey? No, that survey was posted on the city's website. And so Morris, or I don't know that we collected demographic data about. There's a survey monkey, so. Yeah, so we don't have any kind of demographic data about who filled that out, where they're from, anything like that, Labette.
I'm sorry, I'm leaving. I've got cats at home that are scared.
And is that the same one that we've got in the email? Yeah.
Oh, I apologize.
was
So
sent to over-
the citizen satisfaction survey, the citizen satisfaction survey was the one that we attached to you. That was the one that was done last year. That is a statistically valid survey. It is sent to a representative sample of the community, and then the survey company behind that, if the demographics aren't matching the community, then they go out and target to where they then are able to cull a representative sample and ensure that they reflect the population distribution across the city, socioeconomic status, racial status, gender status, et cetera.
Jeff?
I have two questions, if that's okay. As we did the new proposal for tonight, and I want to be sensitive when I say this, because I do support the police and I do support the project, but it stayed at the high level when there was that lower 95 amended one. I guess my first question would be, why did that not, like, what was the rationale for that staying where it was versus everything else going lower?
Bear with me for just a second, but Jeff, our thought process on that was going back to this conversation from a couple weeks ago and the fact that the Justice Center seemed to have something reflecting unanimous support of the members that evening. So we were just trying to be reflective of the pulse of the committee. Again, not inserting ourselves, but just trying to sort of reflect what we thought we saw and heard in the conversation that night.
And then my other thought as I went first, and I've been listening to everybody, I think my big question that I keep thinking about are is what is the investments that we can do now with this money that will create generational change to keep families here as they get older. And a lot of these are necessities and stuff, but I know friends of mine that have moved out of the area. They didn't move to other towns because they had better streets. It was because of the amenities that they had with that city. And so I just think those things are important to consider.
Zach, I had a quick question. If this somehow does not get through or run through, do they do a line item veto like the Justice Center? Can they say, we don't agree to everything, but we know we must have a Justice Center? Because I don't know how many saw the email that came in, I think it was today or yesterday from Heather, that showed another flood at the police station from a urinal. I mean, that is an absolute must. I cannot emphasize that enough. I think we were all in unanimous agreement on that. But
The short answer, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
You're
just
fine.
to be quick to the point is, we ultimately will, whatever we put in writing will be a non-binding recommendation to the council. They, quite frankly, they could copy paste and put it into a resolution that they would vote on. They could chop it up with a samurai sword and do whatever they want to.
So that I just wanted to make sure that was an option for them to say, look, we can't do this right now, but we can do the.
Yeah, they have absolutely every option to do whatever they want to.
Yeah, because ultimately
could
we're
that-
just recommendations.
So could that include that maybe we make a recommendation that I've seen on ballots before, there's like 2 or 3 bond questions. And one question is Justice Center, one question is Rec Center, and one question is all other assets. And I don't know if that makes strategic sense to get passed again. I'm big on the passability. But, maybe people get to too much picking and choosing. But at the same time, they have their opportunity to vote. And is that a good recommendation that we could make? That we could fund everything, but you get to pick your priorities.
Yeah, I will add, and I think this was discussed maybe at our second meeting. Zach, please feel free to interject. Zach got some professional advice from bond counsel, along with, I think, the city's legal attorney, that said in a committee structure like this, it would be best not to make ballot decisions for the integrity of the process to determine the highest and best needs in the community, that the trying to wade into the political nature of what will pass or how it should be structured could potentially, not that it would, but potentially compromise the activity of the committee. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, they wanted the advice on that was so city council members or elected officials are in a little bit different position than the rest of us. Under state law, they are in a position where they can advocate for or against issues. The rest of us are prohibited from doing that. So the advice of council was that we not engage in that conversation so as to not make an appearance or an allegation that we were organizing questions in such a way to garner favor or passability with the voters. Now, the bond counsel did permit us to provide you factual information that communities do take different approaches. Some of them put every question on with every single issue funded in it, and others have made a practice of, ooh, that's exciting, make a practice of splitting the questions into categorical issues. But we certainly are prohibited from trying to strategize about how to organize those for favorability.
That may not be the answer you want, but does that help?
I still feel that we can, I mean, we're tasked with giving a recommendation.
Sure.
That recommendation could be 2 or 3 or however many questions. My opinion, if that's just, whatever that fits with, quote, the legalities, I
Sure.
don't know.
Yeah.
Above my pay grade, I don't know.
Sure. So we are at this point where we agree on most of the things about most of the money, which is good. We have the rec center hanging out here. I'm going to echo GK's comments that I do think that it would be harmful, and I want to be clear, I am not 100% endorsing a square rec center. However, I do believe it would be harmful to pull the 2 big municipal facilities out of the square without any type of an infill development plan. So in the spirit of cooperation and trying to reach a consensus, I don't know if you will flick boogers at me or what, but I'm gonna offer this as a compromise to consider. Is that there is broad, better write these down. I should have written these down. Broad agreement on the 258 million. Let me run through these and then we can dissect it. We broad agreement on the 258 million as priorities. I would further suggest that our recommendation to the council would be that a concept of a rec center in Independence enjoyed broad support by the committee. However, with that comma, however, there were significant questions about the programming, the function, the location, and generally the committee, the spirit of the questions was they need to be thought over a lot more about the rec center. This may be the big one that I would throw in, is that we consider, if we're at 258 million, that we consider an amount of money, and I would, as a place to start the conversation, add at least $10 million to support infill development or redevelopment of the City Hall and Independence Police Department parcels so as not to cause harm to the Independence Square.
I think tearing down those 2 locations would have 0 effect on the Independence Square because nobody comes to Independence. No tourists come to Independence to see our city hall or our police station. So we won't lose the tourism portion of that. But I'm in strong agreement. We just can't leave those areas blank. We
Yeah,
can't rehab.
I would
before
agree.
we-
I don't
yeah.
think, I
I
agree.
get that. Just,
Those are not tourists, and well, in
Not
the,
the kind
the
we
over,
want.
I was gonna say Chief Dustman's overnight tourists, yeah. But I would add, I think, and this is way out of my swim lane, but, you know, that there will probably be, and I think we heard in the presentations that there would not be, in the current budget, there is not money to handle potential remediation of the soil, the preparation to make it ready and accessible, for developer, potentially the grade, which we talked about, is slopes from, you know, certainly Memorial, definitely from Main Street, significantly down to the east. That grading issue, I'm sure. But I am throwing that. I recognize that this is me throwing this out here on an absolute whim. But I need to be very clear. I say that as somebody who lives by the square, and don't want to see these vacant parcels become a hindrance to future economic development.
Doug, I'm going to say there's been a big jump there for me from what I supported and now what you're saying we have consensus with, and I am not in consensus with that. I don't support those numbers that the city was able to go in and make some cuts, and I felt we were in a better place than I feel with those numbers that are up there now. So I just want that said on
Sure.
my behalf.
Sure. I appreciate that. And I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting we currently have consensus. So I am
Well,
trying.
that's what I'm sorry. I was hearing that with the 258 we were in consensus, and I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not.
Okay. And I should clarify, when I said 258, my reading the room is there was consensus on the Justice Center and all projects except for Recreation Center was where I felt like we had reached some level of consensus. But I appreciate your, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I I think it's critical how this statement or recommendation is stated. It's one thing to say, we agree there are 200 million or 300 million or whatever the number is. We agree there are these kinds of needs in the community. That's one question. It's a different statement to say, we recommend a $258 million bond issue. I will not recommend a $250 million or 200 and some million dollar bond issue, because that, in my opinion, and I don't agree with what they're saying here, I think that has slim to no chance of getting approved. So if we say we believe there are this amount of needs, but it's up to the city council to decide whether there is one or multiple bond issues, whether the tax increase can be spread out phased in over time, that is a decision for them. We should never leave the impression that we favor one bond issue of a huge amount of money. That's my thinking on this.
Okay.
And I kind of agree with the numbers up there. I was really pleased to see the streets get cut down and somebody say there is other pots of money we can get for that. And the same with the city facilities. And once again, if those are really maintenance things, I don't know. Go ahead.
I think regarding the streets, I think what's really happened is that a lot of the tax money that was budgeted for street maintenance was actually spent on street improvements, like 24 Highway, a ramp off of I-70 at Little Blue Parkway, money earmarked for the square, something that's going on Sterling. a lot of that money was taken away from maintenance and spent on improvements. So not all of this money is needed. It's needed for maintenance because we use the maintenance money for improvements. And somehow that may have to be said to answer the public's question, because they say, I thought we voted money for street maintenance. What's the problem? Well, an answer that's been given is, well, prices go up. But that's not the total answer. So we can say, well, we did spend a lot of money on improving our infrastructure. So not all, it's kind of just switching the money around. It's reimbursing in effect.
There does create this challenging dynamic when we look at multiple funding sources for multiple projects and what dollar is actually going to which particular area.
Is there any way they could save City Hall and just move the court section of that to the new Justice Center? How much money would that save? And just keep the basic City Hall amenities and city council meetings and just move the courts to go with the Justice Center over here? Would that save some money? Plus, it wouldn't leave that void. You'd only have the void of the police station. Has that ever been thought in consideration? Because I don't know what the status is of City Hall's building.
Well, also too, like us getting that GEHA building for that price was a crazy deal. There's no way the city could have built a city hall for that. I mean, and I know a developer that offered double to pay for that because it was such a crazy amount. So I don't know. I think where City Hall is going to be, I don't think we could have had a better deal ever for that. That's just my opinion.
Let me do a reset with you all, because it is 8:17. In full disclosure, I'm thinking through my head, how do we move forward? And I'm not sure I have a great answer in front of me. I will restate what I said early on, that my hope is consensus. And actually, quite frankly, if we called for an up-down vote, I'm actually not sure it would pass, because I think we might be right at 50-50. If we put up allocation amendment 1 and asked, for a show of hands, we might be stuck. And I want to restate kind of early on what I think we gain by consensus is we send a strong message to the council. I think if we go in there with something that has, I think if there's 16 of us here, if something passes 9-7, I think that further confuses the council on what do people think is best. And ultimately, I think there's a trickle down to the voters, and that it would be an easy thing to point to and say, well, the GO bond committee couldn't even come together. So I wanted to make that statement. At this exact moment, I'm a little out of ideas on thinking about how we sort of pull folks together, but we have a lot of brain power in this room. So if any of you have been stewing on compromise or consensus ideas, feel free. The floor is yours.
Well, I think that maybe we should look back to what we were asked to do, because we weren't all asked to agree. We were asked to make a recommendation. And maybe we have to deliver several recommendations or several line items to the council as a body as a whole of how we recommend, not agreeing with each other, but just how we think that they should consider moving forward. And maybe a consensus is not where we need to land.
Okay.
And that maybe we just need to write out what our thoughts are on this bond issue and present that to the council and let them have that information. Because really what we're doing here is being a focus group for the voters. And you don't do focus groups to get everyone to agree. You do focus groups so that you can pivot your decision on, how to get it sold to the Vox Populi. And maybe that's what we need, is give them all the information. Maybe that's the best use of our time. And that's my thought.
Okay. Well, with that, and I'm going to encourage anybody to chime in as soon as they want, but I'm going to throw a couple things out, and I'm going to see if there's some recommendations that we agree on. Can we agree on a fully funded Justice Center?
Fully funded at the high end is 125.
At 125. Okay, that is a piece that we have consensus on. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff, please.
I want to state my full support for the police. I think my hesitation is, like, are we going to get to the point that we do that at the expense of taking something else off the list? Or at the amended allocation, we still get that, plus a whole lot of other stuff that's really looking good. That's just my concern. I do not want to sound like I don't support the police station and the Justice Center.
Of course, I don't think for a second that's how it sounds.
And I think that's just my concern. That's my thought where I'm at.
I think Amendment 1 is well thought out and the money is well spread out, in my opinion.
Zach, can we go back to that slide, please? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, before we go too far on this, I mean, we went around the room with Amendment 1 on the screen, and a lot of people liked a lot of the things. I mean, to state the obvious, we are stuck on the rec center issue.
So I just still have that question about if we go down to 119 on the Justice Center, what does that leave out for them?
So that would we were spitballing in our meeting when we were looking at these numbers, but like covered car parts for car parks,
Port, yeah.
Whatever they're called, those covered things that go over your car. Yeah, for all the employees at the center, not just the police cars. And so it was one of those amenities that I think could be just shrunken down.
No, that's what I wondered. It would be good for him to
Chief, we'll give you the floor for a second.
Just for accuracy's sake, the covered parking is only for patrol, so it's not even all the police vehicles, and it's not personal vehicles. It's only the police assets in storms like we have right now. The last time we had hail damage, it was $200,000 to replace we're self-insured, those kinds of things. So that's the only covered parking. It was like $1.4 million that you saw. So when we came out of our last meeting, we were at 125, and I told you that in the training center, with that removed, as you saw from Monday night, we're going to have to fit in the weight room that's in that facility and the training space to do defensive tactics. The only room where we do our defensive tactics training currently is in the multipurpose room, which is about twice the size of this, and we have to do it in shifts. When we ground fight and do other things, people are standing long to do that. So this room goes away. With the addition in phase 2, there'll be stairs and an elevator shaft in here. So this isn't even an option either. So then we have no training space. So we have to incorporate that into the facility somewhere. At 119, just off the top of my head, I wasn't involved in that meeting where that was discussed, but just generally as I've thought throughout the evening, probably that would eliminate the K-9 facility from coming out here, and we would keep it out off of Vista, and everything else would come here. That would probably be the easiest way. Again, you can't take special operations out of their facility now, leave their vehicles there, and expect them to come out here to get ready for work, office out here, drive over there to get SWAT equipment and other things. So that would probably be at 119 million where we would land without having a magic crystal ball.
Do officers take their dogs home?
They do. They have so a couple different options. They are family dogs, and we have kennels. The city provides kennels for them at their private residence, big chain link outside kennels. That facility is for if they're sick or when they're training, like when they're officed out. So the dog didn't just stay in the car the whole time. They can move, run around. There's also a training component out there where they have to certify every single year through the state to actually be certified on drug detection, article searches, aggression, those kinds of things. So we just hosted that statewide conference down at Stony Creek just this last month for all the state canines to come in. So we were able to do that. And then we also, if they go on vacation, obviously they can't leave that dog unattended. So they house them there. And the other handlers pick up feeding and all the
While we have you on the topic of the canine building, your current building is not in good shape, is it?
No, it's the old animal control. facility, and that actually is currently where the incinerator is for all of the other animals that we put, deceased deer on the side of the road, that kind of stuff.
And it's my understanding you've also had like AC issues, electrical issues there. It's not, I
Correct.
wouldn't say it's a safe.
Yeah, it's less than ideal, but I'm just trying to be realistic with all of you. As far as where we would cut, we would probably take the canine and leave them there for right now. Just because all the rest of it is centrally located around this hub that will be here and over there. It just is not feasible to separate those offsite facilities in some other capacity.
How many kennel spaces do you need?
We have 5 dogs right now, and so this facility as it's programmed is programmed for, I think it was 8 kennels, which allows the 2 outside agency of an overflow of 2. We anticipate having a 6. We have a vacancy in one of our dogs, so we would have a max of 6 if we had a full contingent. And that allows for 2 outside agency dogs, which again, if they go on vacation, we train every week with outside agencies that we actually host and put on. We actually take their dogs. So.
Okay, I think the incinerator is supposed to go to the other
Animal control.
building.
Yep.
I wondered if you max out at 6 at any given time.
That would be the most that we would have unless we added in future years. But right now, as we are staffed, we would max out at 6 dogs.
So maybe a conversation at some point to house them at the shelter, the new shelter?
I don't
No?
think you can do that because of the aggression side. Like,
Okay.
I'll tell you just kind of tongue in cheek, but these dogs, and they are wonderful animals, and they are an invaluable
No, I get
asset. But when we go in on we come in because the door's broken in and we think there's a burglar inside and the dog is off lead. I got a gun in my hand and I'm still like, what's Fido doing? So we have bites and everything else that happens.
Okay.
Okay, I'm continuing to offer compromises. So, and I'm optimistic that there's something here. Or not in, but perhaps what I'm about to say. But in our spirit of collaboration, I'm going to focus my comments, I think, on the rec center because that is where we need to come together. Go ahead, GK.
Can I make a recommendation that maybe we have to have one more meeting? I mean, because clearly it's 8:30 at night. I don't know about your all brain power, but there's a storm out there, and that maybe we need to move this on so we can all get home safely. Is that a possibility, Mr. Chairman?
Well, anything that's amenable to the group is certainly a possibility.
So I think if we were going to make a recommendation, maybe we'd look at like November 6th or something like that, a few weeks out, so we had time to chew on this.
So a week from today.
Yeah, a week from today.
A week from today, which would still then put us in line with presenting on the 12th.
Correct.
I would happily entertain that, but I'm going to ask for just some head nods. I am going to ask for your permission, unofficially, by head nods, to come prepared, that I would come prepared with some written recommendations that we can start to look at. I don't want to start from this exact moment where we're at today and keep talking, that we have actually some things, and I would do my best to have it disseminated in advance to look at.
Yeah, if we provided those to the city clerk, she could get those all out to everyone, right? And
yeah, I mean, just again, in the spirit of transparency, what I'm looking for, and in the course of this week before our next meeting, is how can we find what is the common spirit of this committee to take forward to the council, because clearly I have mentioned this to some people offline. I want to thank all of you for the positive demeanor of the conversation. It would be easy to poke and attack others for having differing views, and I think a lasting memory I will have of this group is the professional nature of which you have conducted yourself, and I think we should all be grateful and thankful for that. Clearly, on that issue, we are somewhere in the middle, and we need to try to figure out how we can find something to agree on.
I got a question. As I'm thinking about recommendations, and I'm a little unclear because I think I'm going off your question, but is it possible that we could say, because we're not all like in super disagreement. So we could say, this is a great idea, but then this is also a great idea. We had two things. We're like, we see the value in two, or do we have to only have one thing? Does that make sense?
I think that's what I'm asking for your permission to kind
So
of.
we can have, we could, but I'm saying like, can we do that to the council? Can we say, hey, council, we had like all these great discussions and there's two different ways you could go and they're both valid, you know? I mean, or do we have to, that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
can we do that? Is that appropriate to present to the council?
Yeah, quite frankly, as a non-binding organization, we can make any recommendation.
Would that satisfy your feeling of consensus? Because I think
Yes.
possibly we could agree as a group that two things can be true, right? I mean, this is a great idea. This is also an okay idea. We don't know what's going to, and they may completely not like what we present anyway.
They could
'cause
use it as
it's
toilet paper
non-binding
if
and
they
they
wanted
could
to.
just like throw it out, right?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, I think like in the spirit of the rec center conversation, and don't get me wrong, I'm going to get us adjourned here in just a minute, but in the rec center conversation, I think we all agree that there was the discussion was robust about knowing who I am as a rec center, what is my purpose, better understanding programming. We've heard that in multiple presentations that there needed to be more clarity around before going to the voters what this would be. Clearly, we would need to include in there that the study of the location, the interest of serving needs versus tourism, and these are all things that were brought up. So I think we can state all of those, and I think we can all agree that these were the things that were discussed. And it may be that we just ask the council to decide. So that could be a recommendation. Oh yeah. We already had a
job. You get points.
We had a motion and a second. Is there any discussion about the minutes that were printed off? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to the minutes as presented? Okay, very quickly, I would take a motion to adjourn until Wednesday, November the 6th at 5:30. I get Zach. Is that okay?
Yes, we're at the committee's disposal.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn until then?
So moved.
And a second? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
See you next week.
Thank you.